The American judicial system operates within a framework inherited from English common law traditions, where decisions build upon prior rulings to foster consistency and predictability in legal outcomes. At the core of this system lies the doctrine of stare decisis, which encourages courts to adhere to precedents established in earlier cases, thereby creating a chain of authority that guides future interpretations of statutes and constitutional provisions. This principle, while not enshrined as a formal statute or constitutional mandate, serves as a foundational policy that balances the need for stability with the potential for legal evolution. In practice, it allows one ruling to influence subsequent decisions, promoting fairness by ensuring similar cases receive similar treatment, yet it also introduces complexities when precedents diverge from the original text or intent of the law. The system's reliance on such doctrines underscores a broader tension between rigid adherence to enacted laws and the adaptive nature of judicial interpretation, where judges wield significant discretion in applying broad legal language to unforeseen circumstances. Precedents, as the building blocks of this doctrine, emerge from court rulings that interpret laws in specific contexts, often extending their application beyond initial legislative purposes. For instance, a law enacted to address one societal issue might be invoked in a dissimilar scenario if a judge deems the textual meaning sufficiently encompassing, thereby setting a precedent that binds or persuades future courts. This process is not mechanical but involves judgment on whether facts align closely enough, leading to possibilities of distinguishing cases or, in rare instances, overruling prior decisions when they are deemed flawed or outdated. The hierarchical structure of courts amplifies this dynamic. Lower courts are strictly bound by higher ones, while apex courts like the Supreme Court retain flexibility to correct errors, weighing factors such as the quality of reasoning, societal reliance, and workability. Critics contend that this flexibility can mask subjective preferences, allowing personal philosophies to shape outcomes under the guise of doctrinal fidelity. Ultimately, the American judiciary's operation reflects a delicate equilibrium between tradition and adaptability, where unwritten norms reinforce the system's integrity but also invite scrutiny for potential overreach. Judicial immunity protects decision-makers from personal liability, ensuring independence, yet it coexists with professional ethics that discourage frequent disruptions to established rulings. As laws accumulate and interpretations expand, the system risks drifting from democratic enactments, prompting ongoing debates about accountability and reform. This essay examines these elements critically, exploring how precedents and norms interact to define legal authority, while highlighting vulnerabilities that could undermine public trust in the rule of law. The nature and origins of stare decisis. Stare decisis, derived from Latin meaning to stand by things decided, functions as a doctrinal cornerstone in the American legal landscape, emphasizing adherence to prior judicial decisions to maintain consistency across cases. Originating in 18th-century English common law, as articulated by scholars like William Blackstone, it was adopted in the United States to prevent arbitrary rulings and enable predictable legal planning for individuals and institutions. In this context, it operates as a principle of policy rather than an inexorable command, allowing courts to build a coherent body of law over time without starting anew in every dispute. The doctrine manifests in two forms: vertical, where lower courts must follow higher ones in the same jurisdiction, and horizontal, where courts respect their own or peer precedents unless compelling reasons exist for departure. This traditional foundation distinguishes the American system from civil law jurisdictions that prioritize codified statutes over case-by-case development. In the U.S., statutes and constitutional provisions provide the raw material, but their general wording necessitates interpretation, often leading to precedents that refine or expand meanings. For example, broad clauses like those governing interstate commerce have been interpreted progressively wider through successive rulings, illustrating how stare decisis facilitates incremental legal growth. However, this reliance on tradition rather than explicit legal mandate means the doctrine's application depends on judicial consensus, fostering a culture where stability is valued but not absolute, particularly in constitutional matters where amendments are arduous. The absence of stare decisis as a codified law highlights its status as a judge-made tool, embedded in practices that prioritize efficiency and legitimacy. Courts invoke it to avoid chaos from constant reevaluation, yet they acknowledge its limitations, permitting overrulings in extraordinary circumstances to align with evolving societal understandings or correct egregious errors. This duality ensures the system's adaptability but also exposes it to critiques of inconsistency, as the threshold for departure, such as reliance interests or changed facts, remains subject to interpretation. Thus, stare decisis embodies the common law's evolutionary spirit, bridging historical precedents with contemporary needs while underscoring the judiciary's role in shaping legal norms beyond legislative intent. Precedents, setting, overruling, and subjectivity. Precedents form the practical application of stare decisis, arising when courts interpret laws in ways that establish binding or persuasive rules for future similar cases. A ruling's holding, the core legal principle, becomes authoritative, guiding lower courts and often the issuing court itself, unless facts differ sufficiently to allow distinction without formal overruling. This mechanism promotes even-handedness, as seen in landmark shifts where outdated precedents are replaced, such as the transition from segregationist doctrines to inclusive civil rights standards. Yet, the process introduces subjectivity, as judges determine analogy and scope, potentially influenced by philosophical views or contextual factors, leading to debates over whether precedents truly reflect objective law or layered interpretations. Overruling precedents requires strong justification, particularly at the Supreme Court level, where factors like reasoning quality, practical workability, and societal reliance are weighed. In statutory cases, deference is stronger since legislatures can amend laws, but constitutional precedents face a lower bar due to amendment difficulties. This framework allows correction of flaws but can perpetuate errors if norms discourage frequent reversals, creating a ratchet effect where expansions endure while contractions are rare. For instance, interpretations of economic regulations have extended federal powers far beyond initial scopes, demonstrating how chained precedents can drift from original textual meanings through discretionary applications. The inherent subjectivity in setting and applying precedents stems from human judgment, where reasonable disagreements on textual meaning or factual similarity can yield varied outcomes. While intended to constrain arbitrariness, this discretion risks ulterior motivations or biases, as precedents are not immune to philosophical shifts in court compositions. Critics argue that such flexibility transforms judges into de facto lawmakers, supplanting enacted texts with accumulated glosses, yet proponents view it as essential for legal adaptability in a changing society. Overall, precedents encapsulate the tension between stability and fidelity, where overrulings serve as corrective valves but do not eliminate the potential for interpretive divergence. Unwritten rules and judicial practices. Beyond formal doctrines, the American judiciary relies on unwritten rules that shape courtroom conduct, decision-making, and institutional operations, fostering an environment of mutual respect and efficiency. Judicial independence, for instance, mandates impartiality free from external pressures, including norms against private communications with parties and requirements for recusal in conflicts. These ethics, partially advisory through codes, promote public trust by ensuring decisions appear neutral, yet their unwritten nature allows flexibility that can vary by court level. Similarly, separation of powers discourages advisory opinions on hypotheticals, confining rulings to actual controversies to avoid encroaching on legislative or executive domains. Collegiality among judges manifests as deference, where criticisms of peers are tempered and overrulings minimized to preserve harmony and legitimacy. This norm extends to practices like senior judges assigning opinions in panels or strategic timing of retirements to influence successors, reflecting an internal culture that prioritizes institutional cohesion. Less visible are administrative norms, such as pooled clerk reviews for case selection at higher courts or handling emergencies through unsigned orders, which enhance efficiency but reduce transparency. These practices, while not codified, underpin the system's operation, ensuring smooth functioning amid complex caseloads. Courtroom decorum further exemplifies unwritten expectations, requiring formal address and respectful behavior to uphold dignity, with breaches risking contempt. In nominations, senatorial courtesy allows informal vetoes, respecting federalism but subject to partisan erosion. Collectively, these rules create a self-regulating framework that balances independence with accountability, yet their informal status invites critiques of insularity, as they can shield inconsistencies or biases without democratic oversight. Thus, unwritten practices complement doctrines like stare decisis, embedding traditions that sustain the judiciary's authority while exposing it to potential abuses of discretion. Criticisms and vulnerabilities of the system. The American judicial system's dependence on stare decisis and unwritten norms draws significant criticism for enabling overreach, where judges interpret laws expansively, effectively creating policy beyond legislative intent. This judicial activism allows rulings to set national standards, as precedents from apex courts bind nationwide, potentially overriding voter-approved measures or statutes deemed unconstitutional. Forum shopping exacerbates this, permitting litigants to select favorable venues, leading to circuit splits and uneven application until resolved, highlighting vulnerabilities in uniformity and predictability. Subjectivity and bias concerns arise from discretionary elements, where philosophical differences yield inconsistent outcomes in similar cases, eroding public trust. Judicial immunity shields errors or malice, combined with reluctance to overrule, viewed as laziness or obstruction, perpetuating flawed precedents and creating a culture of deference that critics liken to institutional self-protection. The accumulation of laws and interpretations risks complexity and drift, where original meanings are obscured by layered rulings, turning the system into one reliant on judicial gloss rather than textual fidelity. Accountability deficits stem from lifetime tenures and appointment processes, insulating judges from direct democratic input, while elections in some states introduce political biases. These flaws invite proposals for reforms like term limits or stricter ethics, yet the system's design, balancing independence with checks like appeals and legislative overrides, defends against majority overreach. Nonetheless, vulnerabilities persist, as unchallenged precedents can entrench societal harms, underscoring the need for vigilant scrutiny to maintain legitimacy in a democratic framework. Conclusion: Judicial precedent and authority in the U.S. legal system. The American judicial system's heavy reliance on stare decisis and unwritten norms creates a framework that purports to ensure continuity and predictability, but frequently enables judicial overreach and erodes fidelity to enacted law and democratic intent. Inherited from English common law, stare decisis operates as a judge-made policy rather than a binding mandate, permitting apex courts like the Supreme Court broad discretion to expand interpretations, often far beyond original statutory or constitutional text, while lower courts remain rigidly bound in vertical chains. This dynamic fosters incremental expansions of federal power, as seen in successive rulings on interstate commerce or economic regulations, where precedents accumulate into layered glosses that obscure textual meanings and supplant legislative enactments with judicial policymaking. The doctrine's non-absolute character, allowing overrulings only under exceptional circumstances, produces a ratchet effect. Expansions of authority endure with strong deference, while contractions face institutional resistance, perpetuating errors and entrenching flawed precedents under the guise of stability. Subjectivity permeates the process, as judges exercise human judgment in distinguishing cases, assessing analogy, and weighing factors like societal reliance or workability, discretion that critics rightly identify as vulnerable to philosophical biases, personal preferences, and shifting court compositions. This transforms the judiciary into de facto lawmakers, where accumulated interpretations drift from democratic enactments, overriding voter-approved measures or statutes through nationwide binding precedents. Unwritten norms compound these vulnerabilities, embedding collegiality, deference, and insularity that minimize overrulings, temper peer criticism, and prioritize institutional cohesion over rigorous self-correction. Judicial immunity shields decision-makers from accountability for errors or malice, while lifetime tenures and appointment processes insulate the bench from direct democratic input, fostering a self-regulating culture that can conceal inconsistencies and biases without meaningful oversight. Forum shopping exploits jurisdictional differences to produce circuit splits and uneven application, further undermining uniformity and predictability. These systemic flaws, overreach masked as interpretation, subjectivity disguised as doctrine, and accountability deficits reinforced by immunity and norms, undermine public trust in the rule of law and invite legitimate scrutiny. As precedents proliferate and interpretations expand unchecked, the judiciary risks becoming an unaccountable branch that supplants rather than applies the law, highlighting persistent vulnerabilities that demand vigilant examination and potential reforms to restore fidelity to textual meanings, enhance transparency, and realign judicial authority with democratic principles. Without such scrutiny, the delicate equilibrium tilts toward entrenched judicial power at the expense of the rule of law it claims to uphold.